pretty good reading month in November. I had 2 5-star reads, and out of the 11 books that I read, 2 of them were nonfiction. 2 of them were children's books, which is new for me. I also have 1 short story collection, 2 romances, 1 young adult book, 1 young adult thriller, 1 horror book, 1 sci-fi book, and 1 literary fiction book. So we have a pretty mixed bag of books. I'll leave timestamps down below in case you're interested in some books versus others. And I'll start off with the only book that I have physically. This is A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enriquez. This is a collection of 12 literary horror short stories. It is Mariana Enriquez's 3rd short story collection and her 4th book that she's published in English. I love the way that she's able to blend supernatural elements with the horrors of everyday life, and that's exactly what she continues to do in this particular collection. There's themes surrounding inequality, corruption, and femicide in this particular collection. I will admit that it was not my favorite out of her 3 short story collections that I've read. However, I still really enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. I also ended up reading Model Home by River Solomon in the month of November. This is a horror novel and River Solomon's take on a haunted house story. That is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to describing this particular book. I will add that there's a variety of different content warnings for this particular book, some of which could be considered spoilers, so I'm not going to mention any, but I would say that if you read Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt or Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, Model Home has some of the same content warnings as those 2 other books have. I don't know if I can find the right words to describe how this book made me feel. It's not a book that you go into it for the enjoyment of reading. It's a book that made me feel gutted, and while reading it I was deeply unsettled yet extremely compelled to keep reading because I wanted to know what was going to happen at the end. So this book essentially revolves around 3 siblings who are brought back together after their parents die in their hometown of Texas, and so all of them are pulled back to their hometown to figure out what happened with their parents, but also to revisit some of the unsettling things that happened to them when they were kids. 2 standouts from Model Home. First, for me, the exploration of motherhood, especially when it comes to Black women and the expectations that are set on them. And 2 is the way that River Solomon details the body and describes the body and how visceral the descriptions are of how needy a body can be. She also talks about the body in relation to desirability and disability. There's just so much to unpack in this book. I think this is going to be one of those books that is best read with someone else so you can talk about the things that are happening as they're happening. It's a book that's definitely going to stay with me. I really want to talk about my 2 5-star reads of the month of November. The first one of those was a surprise because I went into this novella thinking that I was just going to check it out. I was going to see what it was like. I started this series earlier in the year and I was really contemplating whether I was going to continue or not because the first book, The Mercy of God, was just you know, it was like, I'm glad I read it. It was a fun story, but I didn't think I was invested enough to continue. It was just really slow and it just focused on all the wrong things, and I did not like any of the characters involved. So when I picked up Livesuit by James S. A. Corey, I just thought I was going to test out the waters to figure out if I'm going to continue the series or not, and I ended up loving it. I will add, I hated the audiobook. Kept getting irritated with the narrator. He just did not emote. Like, there was no emotion behind the words. So I ended up finishing the audiobook and then immediately picked it back up and read it on my Kindle. So for a little bit of context, this novella is part of the Captives War universe, which is the new series by James S. A. Corey. This is going to be a space opera science fiction series, and in this particular novella, Livesuit, we are following an elite group of volunteers that are essentially geared out in Livesuit, which are essentially these mechanized organic suits that allow them to fight aliens on an even playing field. So I knew going into this novella that there was going to be a lot of action just based on the synopsis, but what I didn't think was going to be there were these really thoughtful conversations about the impacts of war and the physical and the emotional toll that this has on one's body. I absolutely loved this. It was 5 stars, and now I'm really excited to continue with this series. Other 5-star read of the month was the young adult book that I read. This is Looking for Smoke by K.A. Cobell. This is a multi-POV young adult thriller that brings awareness to the missing and murdered Indigenous women's movement, and it is also a debut. This book takes place on the Blackfeet Reservation, where there's a girl that has gone missing. The police have investigated, the community has pitched in, and they have yet to find her body. Now we are dropped into the story through the POV of one of the teenagers that lives there. Her name is Mara. She is new to the reservation. Her family ended up relocating and she feels like she's not fitting in. Now when there's another teenager that goes missing and is found murdered, our main character teams up with other teenagers on the reservation to figure out who is behind the death of this new girl, and also to figure out if this is at all connected with the girl that went missing weeks earlier. I used to read thrillers more frequently than I do now. I actually very rarely pick up a thriller nowadays. That was more of a 3 years ago Alicia. However, I think I'm actually really good at figuring out where a story is heading, or I thought I was, because when I'm telling you that every single time I thought I had it, I did not have it. K.A. Cobell did such a wonderful job at building this very layered mystery that had me guessing every step of the way. I also listened to it via audiobook, and the audiobook was fantastic. It has a podcast element, so if that's something that you enjoy in your books, I think this is one that you should check out. I really enjoyed this book. It was one of the best things that I read in the month of November. I mentioned this in another video already, but I'm participating in the Diverse Baseline Challenge in 2024. So I did pick up 2 children's books to meet one of the prompt requirements for that particular challenge. I only had to read 1, but I found 2, and they were like 10 pages each. They took me like 10 minutes to read overall, so I thought, why not? The first one of those is Gustavo the Shy Ghost, and this is actually part of a series. This is by Flavia Z. Drago. Look, I know that I am not the target audience for children's books, but I really found this particular book to be really endearing and really cozy, and I also really loved the art style. It's what initially drew me in and the reason that I wanted to read it. And this is a story about a ghost who wants to be seen as their full self and be accepted by their community. And that's so beautiful. The next children's book that I ended up picking up, I picked up because November was Indigenous Heritage Month here in the United States. And this book is called Kapaemahu. This is based on an indigenous legend where these entities called Mahu bring their knowledge from Tahiti to the island of Hawaii. And I just found the art style to also be really cool, but I really liked learning about this legend that I had no idea about. The one literary fiction book that I read was Clean. This is by Alia Trabucco Zerán, and it was translated from the Spanish to English by Sophie Hughes. This is a book that is fine. It's fine. Actually, I feel like if I read it in a different time, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. It has all of the elements that speak to my soul. I really like books with unreliable narrators, that have social commentary about class, and stories that have these characters, whether they're annoying or not, that just really pop out at you and feel very real. Those are elements that this book had. It just didn't quite work for me for some reason. I think part of it is that it's very, very slow, and I just needed something a little bit more fast-paced. I needed something a little bit more lighthearted around the time when I was reading this. So what is this book about? We are following a maid within the house of a well-to-do off family. She was initially employed as someone who was going to do a couple of errands here and there and tidy up around the house, maybe make a little bit of food. But later on, she also ends up taking the role of a nanny to a baby that the wife has just had. Now we know from the onset of the book that this little girl has died. We just don't know when, we don't know how, and we don't know the who. But we get a sense that our narrator is being interrogated in some way or giving a confession in some way. She is directly talking to us and at us. I believe this is set in Chile, but if not, it is set in a South American country, and there's a lot of commentary and a lot of weaving in of political unrest, of inequity and inequality, government corruption. And as a reader, you get a sense that something is brewing in the background. I think for me, I just wanted a little bit more of that backstory to come in through the pages. Although the author did have to balance that with another theme that was presenting itself in the book, which is this idea that domestic workers are often unseen. They're there to be there, but not to be seen or heard. Again, this is one that I wish worked a lot better for me. I'm hoping to reread it sometime next year to see if I change my mind at all. I also ended up reading 2 nonfiction books in the month of November. The first one is The Originalism Trap: How Extremists Stole the Constitution and How We the People Can Take It Back by Madiba Dennie. So this is a book that I recommend you read physically because I made the mistake reading it as an audiobook, and when I listen to audiobooks, I listen while I'm driving. This had references to a lot of court cases and documents and parts of history that I was unaware of. And so I would have to pause and research, but I couldn't always do that, so I would move on and not quite understand. So in this book, the author offers a critique of originalism, which is a way that certain people in our government interpret the Constitution and what its meaning is supposed to be. The author argues that originalism is actually a pretty recent modern invention, and the people who argue for an originalist interpretation of the Constitution have an inconsistent way of applying originalism and essentially use it to push forward their own agenda. The author also does include an alternative to originalism, an approach that she calls inclusive constitutionalism, which I found just really interesting. This was a book that I think is definitely worth a read if you're someone who likes to politically engage and kind of know what's going on. I will add though, as mainly a fiction reader, this was a little bit more of a challenging book, again, because there are a lot of references to court cases. And yeah, it was a really informative read for me. Okay, the other nonfiction book that I read is Ruin Their Crops on the Ground: The Politics of Food in the United States, From the Trail of Tears to School Lunch. This is by Andrea Freeman. This is a book that I picked up because it was randomly available on Libby to me, and I'm like, hey, that sounds interesting and I want to read a nonfiction book this month. I also studied public health in school when I was in school, and so I thought I was pretty familiar with the ways that food is weaponized as a tool of oppression. Food deserts were a really big discussion when I was in school. So I thought I had some sort of basis, for going into this and some sort of like basic level understanding. That went all out the window. There was so much that I learned in this book, and it's also very intersectional. The author outlines the ways that food was used as a tool of oppression towards indigenous communities, Black Americans, and then more recently, Latinos in the United States. And so all of that history led to the latter half of this book. The author argues that food programs like SNAP and school lunches are modern ways in which systemic inequities are propelled. So that was really interesting to hear. Definitely recommend if you're interested in this subject. I didn't give it a full 5 stars because I do feel like there was a little bit more cohesion that was needed. I wish the points that this author was making blended more seamlessly with each other, but instead each segment felt a little scattered and divorced from each other. Okay, I have 2 more books for you. They're romance books. Actually quite really enjoyed both of them. I gave them both 4 stars. The first one is The Partner Plot, and this is part of the Green Sisters companion series. I have not read the first one. This was honestly delightful and lighthearted and funny. This is a second chance romance. It's childhood sweethearts to fake marriage. Our main girl has basically reached her dreams. She's been wanting to be a stylist for a very long time, and she's there. She's hustling. She has the work, and she's really well connected. On the other hand, our guy main character has not really lived up to his full potential or what he thinks is his full potential. He had dreams of becoming a basketball player, and he ended up becoming a teacher instead. However, he really loves the profession that he's in. And so when these two meet up again, it becomes really advantageous for both of them to pretend to be married until they realize that there is still a spark there. Yeah, I really, really love this. I think what really stood out to me about this one is that there wasn't that miscommunication trope. It was just these adults who were trying to figure out how their puzzle pieces fit together and whether it would actually work out. And they just had some really great and vulnerable moments that I think are needed in relationships. Okay, the last book that I ended up reading is Love in Bloom by Lucy Eden. This is a big city girl to small town romance. So the premise of this one is that our main character has grandparents who have recently passed away, and they had a farm that is very integral to the very small community where they are located. So this farm is passed along to their granddaughter, who is our main character. However, she never spent time around them. She doesn't really want to live on a farm. She has a fiance back in the city, and she has this really cool job that pays her a lot of money. And so she's like, well, I don't want the farm. She ends up having a fallout in both her career and with her fiance, and decides to spend some time on the farm to decide if it's something she wants to move forward with. Here she ends up meeting this British Indian horticulturist who just sweeps her off her feet. My only gripe with this book is that it is an insta-love story, which are not my favorite, but I still think the way that it was approached seemed very believable. I thought the interactions between our two main characters were just really funny. I was cackling the whole time, and it was really nice to see our main character grow and learn more about herself and uncover more about her grandparents and what they stood for. There's also this secret medical marijuana operation that is going on, which just came out of nowhere, but was really funny but also integral to the story. So I will leave it at that. But while I've been yapping for a lot, let me know down below what your favorite book of November was. Okay, bye.